The story of digital inclusion is an important one, not only for the Philippines, but for the ASEAN region. What we know in the last 3 decades is that this part of the world, including the Philippines, has generated so much GDP growth. In other words, income has grown across the board and economies have grown, but the problem is that this kind of growth and prosperity has not been evenly shared. And so what we are facing today is a time when new technologies, ICT in particular, information and communication technologies, are once again transforming the landscape of work, of play, of communication, and of life itself. And so the question becomes, who is able to take advantage of all of these new technologies, all of this excitement in what some experts call the fourth industrial revolution? And I think a pivotal concept for this question is inclusion. How do we make it so that everybody, or the greatest number of people, can access what technology has to offer, whether that's better education, quality education, whether that's access to the ability to market your ideas and products, whether that's the ability to communicate with your family on remote islands so that you don't feel so isolated, whether that's affordable health care or access to health care if you're in an area with no clinics and no hospitals. So this is really the pivotal question, and I think if you take the Philippines by itself, there are many things going right here. Mm-hmm. So one of the things going right is you have a population that is relatively well educated. You also have a big youth bulge, and having that youth bulge is important because that is going to be your human capital. And then you have experience in an ICT-powered industry, a cloud-powered industry, which is your BPO industry, the single largest creator of new jobs in the private sector in the Philippines, responsible for generating almost 10% of this country's GDP, and nearly equaling now the remittances that 10 million Filipinos abroad send to the Philippines. On top of that, the Philippine government in February of this year announced a cloud-first policy for the public sector. The Department of ICT. In other words, the government has taken a strong stance, which is even more progressive than most governments in ASEAN, where the decision to go cloud first and the declaration signals to the world that the Philippine government is ready to innovate, that it wants to tap cloud computing to deliver and develop services faster and better to Filipino citizens. The question now becomes how that is implemented. Mm-hmm. On the negative side of the ledger in the Philippines, and I don't live here, so that's my limitation, my understanding is that connectivity is still quite poor. Yeah. Speeds are very slow, and the cost of connectivity is also quite high. So when you ask yourself, is it only the upper middle class Filipinos or the wealthy Filipinos that will be able to, afford these kinds of prices for connectivity? If the answer to that is yes, then you are withholding access to a big part of the Philippine population. And so I was thinking that, one of the things that could happen to give greater access, to have affordability, of course you have to build the backbone. Yeah. And that can be a public-private sector partnership. But then you can take sectors like education, where it's proven, it's well researched that if you level the field in education, that more people have access to quality education, not just any education, but more access to quality education, that you will then create more opportunity and more skill sets for the next generation of Filipinos. So if you then say, this is where I'll invest, mm-hmm. as a government, let's say I will invest in education, that is where people in remote areas can have access. I will invite companies to partner with me on solutions to bring knowledge of economics, languages, finance, using technology to facilitate that. Then I think that would be a great way to enhance inclusion in the Philippines. Another area that is of interest to me is people with disability. And I became very interested in that because 4 years ago I met a company that's registered in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. It's called Ganashtim. And this company is B certified, meaning that in the corporate world they have the highest practices of integrity and legality and good treatment of their people, etc. What I found out about this company was that 90% of their employees were people with disability, and that the majority were here in the Philippines.
Oh, cool.
And so I met them. I met them here in the Microsoft office, and I was astounded. One of them had polio, one of them was blind, one of them was wheelchair bound and had no legs. And all of them worked in the online learning and support services industry. This is the business of Ganache Tim. And one of them indicated to me, he could only type like this with his knuckles. But he said at one point he was able to serve online 10 clients at the same time. And I was thinking, if you could unleash more of this talent, really bring technology to empower a group of people with disability, so that they become economically self-sufficient, they pay their taxes, they feel dignified, they feel that they are living full lives. That would be a miracle. That is inclusion. There is no perhaps better encapsulation of the term inclusion and empowerment through technology.
You mentioned about the problem about connectivity, speed, and cost. Do you have any suggestions on how do we address it to promote more inclusion in the digital economy?
Yes, so of course for connectivity and the backbone of your internet and telcos, a lot of that has to be built out, and I believe government, again in partnership, a lot of that will have to be done by the private sector. But there are other technologies. So one of them that we have been propagating and experimenting with and deploying, and we've deployed it here in the Philippines, is a technology called TV white space. And TV white space essentially is a way to give affordable connectivity to people in remote areas by using antennas and television spectrum. So it is the television spectrum that is not being used for broadcasting, and you use that for internet connectivity. We've deployed that very widely in Africa with great results, and we've even taken that to places with no electricity. So we've partnered with solar energy companies, and we have brought the devices and shown that yes, within a 10-kilometer radius you could have this connectivity. In the Philippines, we first tried this technology in Bohol with the early purpose of registering fisher folk in a certain area, so that we could understand how fishery resources were being used and managed. And that registration was done very quickly. Fisher folk who, you'd think, well, they're not urban, but they took to the technology very quickly. And then when Typhoon Haiyan happened, that technology came in an extremely useful way. When most other means of connectivity were down, we were able to transfer antennas to Tacloban and give first responders the connectivity they needed to find other people, to communicate with one another, and just to have the human connection, not to get so depressed and discouraged during what was a very difficult time.
Interesting. So the frequency that is used for TV broadcasting is more reliable than the frequency used for mobile connectivity?
I am not sure about that. That's a technical question, and I'm not sure what the answer is, if it is more reliable. But what we know is that
But it's more affordable.
it is reliable, and I think it's a 10-kilometer radius where you put the antenna. The important thing there is for the government to give the rights to use that spectrum, right? So the government has to give the rights to use that spectrum to give connectivity to farmers, fisher folk, remote schools that have no way of connecting to the internet. Because if you think about it today, the world of knowledge is not what it used to be. You can sit in Bacolod or you can sit in Marawi City and you can listen to the lecture on justice by Michael Sandel of Harvard University. Over, I think, 1 million Chinese have listened to that lecture. So think about it. You can take a topic. You can take mathematics or marketing, or I want to learn Spanish, anything like that. And you know that if you have the discipline, you could actually do a lot of that online.
You also mentioned about cloud technology. What is the implication of cloud technology toward the promotion of inclusivity here in the Philippines? I mean, I'm wondering about the security concerns.
Yes.
For example, in using cloud for public data.
Yes. So let's just first address the question of what can cloud computing do for inclusion. So cloud is the single most important innovation that is driving what we call today the fourth industrial revolution. And essentially, for those of your viewers or listeners who may not know, cloud computing simply refers to to data centers, massive data centers that have been built by companies like Microsoft or Amazon or Google, and they allow people with a device and connectivity essentially to have massive, unlimited computing power in their hands. And the question is then, what does that have to do with inclusion? In the old days, if I were a fashion designer in Indonesia and I wanted to collaborate with bidders from 10 other islands, it would be very difficult for me to communicate with them. Today, I could just use Skype and see them on the camera, and it's free, and they could show me the sample of their work. That's cloud computing. When you use Facebook, you're using the cloud. So the ease of communication and the low cost, that's one thing that cloud offers right away. If I have an idea today, I could put it on YouTube. I could create a website. All of that is put on the cloud. I don't have to buy my own hardware. I don't have to hire an IT specialist. Now, the implication for inclusion is practically in all fields. So I mentioned education. Today, if you just are a learner and you have a mobile phone and you have connectivity, everything's stored on the cloud, all the knowledge on these data centers everywhere, you can access it. Second, if you're a business person, you could be a mom and pop operation in Cebu and you're, want to export organic coconut. You could use the same technology to market your product, to monitor your payments, a secure platform, the same technology that Microsoft's using in Manila or Unilever is using in Singapore. So there are now no barriers, meaning the same technology can be used by everybody, small, medium, or big, poor or rich. You have access to these technologies. And also in terms of cost, pay as you go. So let's say a university has 30,000 students and during exam time, they need massive capacity because students are taking all the exams online. So you may sign up for a lot of cloud capacity at that point in time. And then during the months your students aren't taking exams, you need less. So therefore you sign up for less and you pay for less. Now, you mentioned security. Of course, today the primary obstacle for deploying or using cloud services more is really a perception blocker. Perception blocker in terms of security. What are people looking for in terms of security? Number one, they're looking for their data to be accessible all the time when they need it, when they're on their mobile phone, when they're on their laptop, on their desktop, they want the data accessible. That's security. Security could also mean you don't want anyone snooping in your data, stealing your data, whether that's your bank account or your identity or your family photographs that you don't want circulating on the internet, or your customer information or your revenue. You want all of that to be private, and you want you only to be the person with access to that data. And number three, you also want your data to be safe from criminals who either want to steal your money or disrupt your business or damage your reputation. And then if a disaster strikes, security also means that if there's a flood, you want to make sure your data is not gone. So if your servers got flooded, you want to make sure there's multiple backups, and that's what the cloud offers. So if your data sits in a data center in Singapore, it could have a backup in Hong Kong, it could have a backup in Australia, meaning a pretty massive global disaster has to take place for all of that data to be destroyed. So the perception blocker means that most people today, because they either are not on the cloud or they're not well educated on what cloud is. So when you point out to them that if they use Outlook or Gmail or Facebook, they're already on the cloud, they get surprised. I talk to many government officials in the ASEAN region where they say, oh, we're so worried about cloud. And I say to them, what's your email? And they'll say, it's Hotmail or Gmail or Outlook. And I say, you're already on the cloud. Are you using Facebook Messenger? Yes. You're already on the cloud, so they don't understand what the cloud is. Now, in terms of security, for Microsoft itself, that is our bread and butter. because our entire business of services is cloud-based. So for us, security is a 24/7 question. It's a $1 billion investment and a continuing investment in terms of people. We have what is called a security graph, an intelligence graph. We're able to monitor our ecosystem, and we are looking at billions of bits of data all the time to understand what attack vectors are out there, what malware is spreading, where is the attack, how is it spreading. And we do work with law enforcement. So we work with Europol, we work with Interpol, we work with the FBI to take down some of the most malicious botnets, for example. Botnets are armies of zombie computers that are used to perpetrate cybercrime. For example, to send out 1 million spam emails with malware loaded on them. So that security and the data, I think today, what we know is that in fact it is safer to be on the cloud than to have your data only on premises. Because again, I will repeat, the analogy may be like putting your money under your mattress versus putting your money in the bank, secured by FD, by your insurance, or the whatever government agency insures deposits. If you have a server, just let's say you have a small company, your server is in the office, and someone breaks in or the office burns down, it's gone. It's all gone. So what security do you have? Whereas on the cloud, you'll have your data resiliency, your business continuity, and there are people who are looking after your security 24/7. I will just finish with the caveat that having said all of that, it doesn't mean that the cloud is a silver bullet. Nobody should ever say that the cloud is your perfect solution for all your security problems, because security is a physical issue. Who's coming in and out of your office, who has access to your servers, is a virtual issue. What is online, all of the computing being done online, and who is detecting threats there, who is protecting against threats. And thirdly, it's a human behavior issue. If people have terrible cyber hygiene behavior, if they click on every suspicious website, if they download pirated software, if they're constantly buying CDs or USBs that are already loaded with malware, or buying brand new devices that have operating systems that have been pirated, then a study was done by the National University of Singapore that you have between 61 to 100% chance of immediately being infected already with malicious software or virus that will either opens you to being victimized by cyber criminals or allows your computer to be used as a device by criminals who need massive computing power when they do what they do.
Right. So I found something interesting online when I was looking for your profile. I'm also writing for Asian Scientist.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I wrote for Asian Scientist.
Yeah,
I wrote a blog for you.
Yeah. About the kimchi paradigm.
Yes.
I would like to know more about your view about women in technology and
yes.
and about that kimchi paradigm, because it really sounds really interesting.
You'll have to remind me about the kimchi paradigm. I think I wrote that in my sleep. Women in technology. Technology has a gender problem. And it is very well researched. The numbers speak for themselves. There are very few women, for example, in engineering. And then the higher up you go in tech companies, the pyramid becomes quite narrow. Fewer and fewer women as you go to the top. In the United States in the 80s, there were more women majoring in computer science than there are today. A giant gap. It seems like the women have somehow fallen by the wayside. And if you look at startups, there are articles all over the media on this, in the New York Times and other publications, about how women can often feel, left out. It's a very macho culture. There's sexism in the workplace. And I think that is something that needs to be addressed deliberately. The latest controversy, of course, is the Google memo that one of the employees at Google circulated about, the differences between men and women. And I think what are the issues here? The issues first, the numbers are just really bad. They are so severely imbalanced. And some people could say, well, it's just because men are smarter in math or computer science. But what we know is that when women are exposed early on, they actually advance quite well in these fields. So the numbers are bad. Secondly, I think that companies and governments have not really taken a systematic approach to increasing the participation of girls and women in technology. And this is something that Microsoft is taking very seriously. So for example, our philanthropies efforts where we work on expanding digital literacy, we teach coding, we support computer science majors. We are trying now in many parts of Asia and ASEAN to make sure that a certain number of recipients or beneficiaries are women. So in Myanmar, for example, where we are teaching digital literacy and productivity on the internet and digital skills, we are making sure that we are training trainers who are women. Because it is when younger girls see these kinds of examples that they think to themselves, oh yes, I can definitely do that too.
Yeah.
And you expose them early. And so where we are today, where the leadership of tech companies, there's still, it's a far cry from having gender equality. I think we have to take deliberate measures. In Microsoft, we ask our executives to be very aware that when they put their succession slates together, to ask themselves whether it's their latent bias speaking, where they've just looked at the same people who look like them and act like them, or have they really widened their search and looked at gender diversity. For example, women are less likely to raise their hands for promotions or for bigger roles. It's not because they are not qualified, but it seems like they hesitate. And again, that is well researched. So once we become aware of these behaviors, can we actually correct them?
All right. Do you have any other final words about the perception of digital inclusivity here in the Philippines?
So I think for the Philippines, the challenge is, how to continue growth in this country and how to continue growth in a more inclusive way. So I would focus on very specific things like access to quality education for more Filipinos and leveraging the power of technology to do that. That's one area I would focus. Another area I would focus on is skills for the future. So the BPO industry is only one industry. Today, you have new professions like data scientist or cloud server administrator or cybersecurity specialist. I think TESDA and other agencies in the Philippines, NEDA, different government agencies could take, again, a very designed, very deliberate approach to develop a cadre of Filipinos who have these types of skills. In Singapore, the National University of Singapore is already offering data science as a major, for example. And then I think the third thing I would say is partner with us. Microsoft has been in the Philippines for over 20 years. And as a company, we believe fervently in the power of technology to expand the sphere of opportunity for more people, whether those are people with disability or girls and women or ethnic minorities. And it is a space where we can multiply the ability to win, so that the ability to win is not limited to a tiny sliver of the population. It is very exciting that there are now more than 100 million people in the Philippines, but it's also very discouraging to see that the poverty figures for this country, the people who live below the poverty line, is still very high. I think it's double digits. And Thailand continues to have a higher GDP per capita than we do. And it's really time to get serious and say, what can be designed in the next 3 to 10 years that will leave a real imprint and footprint behind on economic growth and the sharing of prosperity with more Filipinos. I think that's the exciting story that has yet to unfold. And technology, without a doubt, will be part of that story.